Another study by Jamie Pennebaker, we're going to call here the upsetting events study. And again, you don't need to memorize the year, but in 1986, Jamie Pennebaker had undergrads write about trivial things, for instance, describing a room in their house, or had them write about an upsetting event in their life. So they had to write about one or the other. They're brought into the lab. If you were a participant in this study, you'd come into the lab, you'd be brought into a room by yourself, and you would be there for a period of time, you know, a half hour, 45 minutes, writing about either, you know, whichever group you got assigned into. So trivial things or an upsetting event. Now, even though immediately after the writing, okay, the blood pressure was higher for the group who wrote about upsetting events, and they measured mood, and these people were in more of a negative mood than the other group, there were health benefits later. So one of the really cool things about this study was 6 months later, after you wrote about this, you're seeing the benefits. Another thing very cool about this study is how he measured that, because what he did was very creative. He took the number of visits to the health clinic 6 months later and compared that with the two groups and found it was significantly lower for that second group, the upsetting events group. And remember that that was random assignment, right? So we can assume that their norms were the same before that, as far as how often they would go to the health clinic in 6 months. So some real benefits on the immune system overall. Okay, without knowing what those specific benefits are, we do know there's benefits for the immune system. And I'll tell you yet another very cool thing about this study is, as you're learning about this self-disclosure work, we talked about the fact that people may or may not be able, we really vary as far as to what extent we can self-disclose with other people. But he showed here, you don't necessarily have to disclose with other people to get these health benefits, that you can self-disclose with yourself, and it helps. So these, you know, this help to buffer these negative events, upsetting events in people's life, just to write about them. Okay, it's great work by Jamie there. Now, talk about another uniquely human phenomenon here, and that is forgiveness. Okay, very cool work on forgiveness. The humanistic psychologists, first off, they looked at who is least likely to be able to forgive. You know, that idea of letting it go and forgive. Okay, and they found that people who are high on neuroticism were the least likely. It doesn't mean that if you score high on neuroticism that you're not good at forgiving. It just means that there are more people from that group, right? And also, remember from type A personality, we talked about that kind of angry, hostile component, especially with those little things in life. Okay, so people who have that particular component in their personality are also the least likely to be able to forgive overall. There are a lot of health benefits that the humanistic psychologists showed from actually forgiving people when you feel they have done you wrong. There are benefits on the cardiovascular system, and there are these overall immune system health benefits, which, you know, really help prevent a lot of different kinds of illnesses. So very strong benefit here. But I think the most interesting contribution by the humanistic psychologists in this area is the idea that they found that you can teach somebody how to forgive. Now, oftentimes we think with things like this, we think, oh, people are just either born with this or they're not, right? This is not something that can be taught. And I just find this super fascinating, and if you do, you can look it up and read more about it. But let me tell you a little bit about it. How is this done? Well, one of the things that therapists, humanistic therapists will focus on here. Hey, if somebody wants help in being able to forgive, or trying to guide them to this, would be teaching them compassion and learning, teaching them perspective taking. Perspective taking. So, how do you put these things together? Really interesting exercise. Okay? Because what they can do is they can have their client come up with certain events in their life, times when they have done something to somebody else and the other person has actually forgiven them. So they have them come up with like 3 different events that this happened, okay? And discussing these, and discussing how it made them feel when the other person forgave them. They knew what that felt like, and they needed to be reminded of it, right? And how generous it really was of these other people to forgive them when they had done them wrong, okay? And that also the humanistic psychologists focus on teaching children the importance of saying, I'm sorry, but also teaching them the importance of saying, that's okay, I forgive you. That's okay, I forgive you. Oftentimes I think kids are brought up to believe that forgiveness is a sign of weakness, when actually it takes a lot more guts, right? Sometimes to forgive somebody than it does to hold a grudge, okay? And but to teach them not to see this as a sign of failure, and to build those protective walls instead, and refuse to forgive other people, but instead to say, okay, I forgive you. Okay, I forgive you. Okay, and to feel what that feels like on both ends. And the thing is, if kids can learn this, or adults, okay, it will pay back exponentially in the rest of their life, in future, as far as the quality of their future relationships and marriages, even. Very cool. And so this brings us to questionnaire number 7. If you want to take out your self-assessment sheet now, and you can write in the name column forgiveness for questionnaire number 7. You tested yourself on forgiveness. Here's the information you need to interpret your score. Okay. First off, the possible range was from 15 is the lowest possible score, to 150. 150 is the highest possible. What is the lowest and the highest we found in ASU students taking this class so far? Out of approximately 500 students, the lowest score so far has been 16. You haven't quite reached that bottom point, but the highest score has been 105. So maybe we'll have someone in this class surpass that. But so far the highest score that we have for ASU students is 105. And the ASU student mean is 70. 70. We're going to talk about some new research here, some really relatively new research, some of it by Dan Gilbert. Dan Gilbert, by the way, in my opinion, is one of the best writers in psychology. So, knowing how to write a technical article, anybody can learn that, but to also be kind of a creative writer on top of that, I'm not so sure about that. He is both, definitely. And what he does is he doesn't just write for the field of professionals. So he doesn't just write journal articles about the studies that he conducts, but he also writes books for the general public. And his newest book is titled Stumbling Upon Happiness. And what he shows in this book is he talks about, in layperson terms, without jargon, just an interesting book to read, but he talks about the idea that people don't know what will make them happy. So when we ask people, what would make you happy? And then we see these things happen and measure did this really make them happy? We find out they're not very good at thinking. People think they know what will make them happy, and basically they don't. Okay, lots of work showing this. Lots of really cool work. Okay, and then Sonia has some very interesting research. Her last name is pronounced Lavie-Bamersky. Lavie-Bamersky. Okay, Sonia's work has focused on showing that your happiness is actually a genetic set point. So the level of happiness that you experience in life is actually largely, in a large part, maybe even entirely, but we know for sure largely set in genetics. Okay? Good and bad things will move it temporarily, but it always comes back to the set point. It always comes back to your set point. Okay? And that is called hedonic adaptation. Hedonic adaptation, this idea that, sure, some things happen in life and, you're happy about that and you're sad about that. So, it moves it. Good and bad things move it a little bit temporarily, but not permanently. You tend to go right back to your set point. Okay? Sonia also has some really interesting work showing how to be unhappy. Research on what actually results in people being unhappy. And one of the guaranteed ways is comparing yourself with others. Okay? I really want you to think about this for a minute. Comparing yourself with others. Okay? And tends to make people unhappy. And, there's sometimes people have a tendency, and this is a really interesting situation that Sonia sets up sometimes in her research. And imagine, that you were in her research, and she gave you a choice. You've got two different situations. Which one would you rather occur? One, would you rather fail, but find out, that others had also failed, that went in with you? Or would you rather succeed, but then find out that others who came in with you at the same time, your cohorts, succeeded to a greater extent? Which of those two would you rather? That you failed, but you found out that everybody did? Or that you succeeded, but that these others succeeded more than you did? Okay? And, people who choose, I would rather fail if others fail more. Okay? You kind of see where that is a no-win situation when you sit back and you look at it from this viewpoint. Okay? Sometimes people will, at this point, will say, well, can you be happy, right? How can you experience happiness in life? How can you increase the sense of happiness? Okay? And this is where we go back to Dan Gilbert, and he has shown that keeping a gratitude journal, really helps to increase your sense of happiness. So you can actually move from that set point, that genetically determined set point, okay, by doing something, which is keeping a gratitude journal. This brings us all the way back to that positive shrinking study, right? Remember that, what did those people have to write about in the group that was successful in losing weight, even though none of them were trying to lose weight? And it was the group who had to write about things they really valued in their life. So that's a pretty powerful message coming through in many different studies in many different ways. Keeping a gratitude journal, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, in the morning if you're a lark, at nighttime if you're an owl, or any other time if you're in between or would rather. Very cool way of doing that. Okay, speaking of gratitude, I wanted to play this clip for you, which is my favorite example of gratitude. And this is from a movie, actually a very good movie. It's a little independent film that is called Happy Thank You More Please. But it's happy thank you more please is one word. So if you try to look this up, remember that, you know, you have to combine all those words. Happy thank you more please, and here we go.